this. Huge thanks and congratulations to all of you in attendance today. We lead extremely busy lives with demanding schedules, and it seems to be on the uptick every single day. So, taking time to join us for this, thank you. We have a very intentional, informative, and multifaceted summit. This is, of course, the 2024 Pineapple Support Mental Health Summit. It's our fifth annual time hosting this, which is such a great feeling to know that for 5 years we've brought the community together to host these discussions. I'm Laura Desiree. I'm your presenter, your host throughout this summit. And we have such an exciting program for all of you. When we first started discussing what this year's summit might look like thematically, the idea of relationships was just so loud and necessary for us. Community being an important facet of doing well in this industry. Doing well meaning, yes, success financially, but also mental wellness. Relationships are an undeniable importance to us. So we have these days with very dedicated, focused conversations regarding the unique relationship dynamics. Today is a great one. It's romantic relationships. I find it very fitting. I don't know if anyone else can relate. I'm very recently single, so I'm looking forward to learning a lot from not only our expert who will be kicking things off, but also the entire group of panelists that we're going to have in the second part of today. So to set a couple expectations, please make yourselves comfortable. Please know that the chat is open. It's an area for you to get interactive with the other members of the audience and with our presenters, our speakers. So if you have questions along the way, you can note them there. And a mention of the second part of our day, which is going to be an open dialogue with some incredible seasoned industry professionals, with the opportunity for you as well to be contributing your questions and getting involved in that conversation. So this first hour is a presentation from our expert, Dr. Tess Kilwein. So thrilled to have her expertise, her compassion in this space for us today to discuss romantic relationships. But of course, before we get to that, allow me to just run you down this list of sponsors, the folks that have helped keep not only this summit going, but have been so active in keeping Pineapple Support going, and maintaining as a resource for the industry. So our sponsor list for this event is, of course, Pornhub, C4S, Strip Chat, Cam4, F2F, Feet Fix, Fan Shop, and Feel Hub X. Oof, you can find all of those on our Pineapple Support event page as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our lead, our guide, and potentially by the end of this, our guru, Dr. Tess Kilwein. Thank you so much for today's presentation. I will see everyone on the other side of this presentation to kick off our panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura, for that amazing introduction. This is one of my favorite events of the year, so I was really grateful to be asked to come back and present on romantic relationships this year. I'll go ahead and share my screen with folks, and then we'll get started. As Laura said, feel free to use the Q&A function throughout the chat. What I will do is save answering those questions until the end for time purposes. Want to make sure that we're able to get through each of the slides here. And if we do have that time at the end for questions, great. If not, it's possible some of those could be asked in the panel section. So let's get started. Today's discussion is on being your best self in romantic relationships. My name is Dr. Tess Kilwein. I use she, them pronouns, and I am a clinical psychologist. So as part of Pineapple Support's 5th annual mental health summit, Navigating the Ties That Shape Us, today's presentation on being your best self in romantic relationships will focus on defining romantic relationships and why they matter. Types of relationships and different relationship orientations will be reviewed throughout today's presentation. Common challenges romantic partners face, like infidelity and jealousy, as well as strategies to improve romantic relationships, like intimacy and communication, will be presented. Finally, the intricacies of romantic relationships in the adult industry while maintaining mental wellness will be discussed. Let's start out with defining romantic relationships. So really, these relationships look different for any partners involved, but we typically define them as emotional and physical connections between individuals, typically characterized by some form of love or affection, and hopefully a sense of deep personal commitment. These relationships often involve a mutual desire between the partners to support one another and build a shared life or connection, typically encompassing some of these attributes on the screen here. So emotional intimacy, a strong bond built on trust and empathy and open communication. This is what allows partners and relationships to share their thoughts, feelings, and experiences with one another. Physical affection may also be important, so expressions of love through physical touch, kissing, cuddling, sexual intimacy, depending on the nature of your relationships. Commitment, a mutual agreement or understanding to invest time and energy and care into the relationship, which may vary in intensity and duration. Shared values and goals, so partners often align their lives around common interests, values, long-term goals. These could be things like marriage, family, or personal growth. And lastly, passion. So a sense of excitement, desire, and attraction that often fosters the initial connection and then deepens over time with our partners. Now that we've defined romantic relationships, let's talk about why they matter. So as we have all likely experienced, romantic relationships can be both positive and negative contributors to our lives. Some of these positive impacts include things like emotional support, companionship, a sense of belonging. And these aspects really play a vital role in our personal growth, our mental well-being, and the fulfillment of social and emotional needs. What is important to note is that there are different aspects of our identity that play a role in how we're impacted by a romantic relationship. So things like relationship status, gender, sexual orientation, age, and physical health conditions play a role in whether romantic relationships are related to better or sometimes even worse health outcomes. But above all, what we know is that it's the quality of our romantic relationships, rather than solely the presence of one, that determines implications for our health. Let's talk first about the benefits of romantic relationships. We surely hope that we're getting these benefits out of the romantic relationships that we involve ourselves in. So, according to the World Health Organizations, individuals who are in stable, high quality romantic relationships have better health outcomes than those who don't. Things like our health outcomes, our life longevity, lots of important factors. So while we have lots of different romantic relationships that we'll be discussing throughout this week, in comparison to some of our other social ties, things like our family, our friends, our coworkers, what we know is that romantic relationships have the most impact on our health outcomes. Healthy, meaningful romantic relationships can bring things that we really need in our lives, like companionship, friendship, love, and security. Being in a romantic relationship also increases our network outside of that romantic relationship. So it can expand our families, it can expand our friend groups, expand our community, makes us feel more socially integrated. And lastly, but importantly, romantic relationships can create greater access to economic resources as well, finances. And of course, it's still important to acknowledge that there can be consequences of romantic relationships. So there's potential risks when we enter a relationship dynamic, including negative or detrimental effects on both physical and mental health. What we know, and I'm sure most of us have experienced at some point, is loss of a romantic relationship through breakups, divorce, or widowhood can have negative effects on both our physical and our mental health. So other events within the context of romantic relationships, like conflict, disappointment, infidelity, can also cause major stress in people's lives. Now, anything that we do in our lives has potential risks. And so the intention is never to avoid romantic relationships altogether, right? But what we hope to provide is some different strategies that might make us experience more of the positive outcomes of our romantic relationships and less of these negative consequences. Before we talk about those strategies, though, let's talk about some different romantic relationship orientations. So, a romantic orientation typically refers to a person's pattern of romantic relationships, both the quantity and quality of those relationships. And we're going to list a few on the screen today. So, monogamy, which is typically what people think of as the standard in relationships, but certainly not the case anymore. In a monogamous relationship, both partners, two partners, are exclusively involved with only each other. And again, while people generally think of monogamy as the romantic relationship standard, there are lots of other relationship orientations that may better fit someone's values or lifestyle. So we're going to share them all today. Monogamy, non-monogamy. So some people refer to non-monogamy as ethical or consensual non-monogamy, but I personally don't like to use that qualifier because it sort of suggests that non-monogamous relationships might inherently be unethical or non-consensual. So those qualifiers are sort of misinformed and ultimately stigmatizing for people. You know, in a monogamous or a non-monogamous relationship, there should always be ethics and consent, right? So in these non-monogamous relationships, partners often have the option to choose to be in multiple romantic relationships at the time. The partners determine through communication and boundaries and expectations what are kind of the expectations for those multiple relationships. So it can look lots of different ways. Open relationships, somewhat similarly, but open relationships, partners might agree to have sexual, romantic, and or emotional interactions with other people. So we think of pop culture, we sort of associate open relationships with hookup culture, right? So folks that maybe engage in casual sexual hookups with other people. But again, it's really up to each partner to determine what that looks like. So it doesn't always mean that hookups are okay in the relationship. It can be a range of sexual, romantic, or emotional interactions that are okay within the dynamic. Next is polyamorous, or poly for short, similar to non-monogamy, and some might argue a matter of language preference, but romantic relationship partners also have the option to pursue other relationships. So these relationships may or may not be hierarchical, where there is sort of a designated primary or nesting partner and secondary partner or partners, but they don't have to be, right? It's really up to that dynamic, what their preferences are, their boundaries, their expectations in the relationship. And polygamy, not to be confused with polyamory. This is the relationship dynamic we're most often seeing like sensationalized in pop culture, like shows like Sister Wives. But it's generally a relationship characterized as traditionally a marriage consisting of three or more partners. This type of relationship is often based in religious identity, and the most common form is maybe one husband and multiple wives. But again, it just depends on the folks involved in that dynamic. And lastly, while less of a focus of today's presentation, I do want to name the existence of a romantic relationship orientation. So this typically involves little to no romantic attraction to others, but it's really on a spectrum. And it doesn't inherently mean like someone is going to live a lifestyle in one certain way. Some aromantic people may decide to be in relationships at one point or another. So above all, what is key, no matter your relationship orientation, if it fits into one of these categories, is it's something entirely different. It's important that relationships are based in communication, understanding, and trust rather than labels themselves. So regardless of the type of relationship that you're in, communicating with your partner or your partners about your expectations and boundaries for your romantic relationships is crucial. So when I work with partners or couples therapy, I use a framework of consent above all things. So when in doubt, ask yourself, did all parties, including those who may not be present in the interaction, consent for the interaction to take place? That can be sort of a way to think through relationships. Okay, now that we have discussed some different relationship orientations, we'll talk about some common challenges in relationships. Now, what we all know is that romantic relationships often face challenges that can test the strength of the bond between partners. So while each relationship is unique, these are just some common difficulties that tend to arise in romantic relationships specifically. Communication issues often being the biggest, right? So these could be anywhere from misunderstandings to lack of clarity to ineffective listening, that can lead ultimately to conflicts and unspoken expectations or assumptions that can create frustration and resentment in a romantic relationship. We also find that some people avoid communication altogether, right? So avoidance of especially difficult conversations can cause issues to fester over time and ultimately escalate over time as well. Trust and betrayal, another common challenges faced by romantic relationship partners, but these can be things like breaches of trust, whether due to infidelity or dishonesty or broken promises. These can all really shake and impact the foundation of a relationship. Rebuilding this trust often requires a lot of time and consistent effort and open communication. So, what we often find in relationships that are navigating challenges is at some point trust was betrayed, and it can take some time, even if there's been maybe an apology or efforts to repair, it can really take some time and effort to get to the relationship back to a place that that trust is rebuilt. And sometimes it never is. Conflict resolution style. So this is ultimately, those partners in a dynamic take different approaches to how they handle disagreements in the relationship. So one partner may be an avoider, one partner may be more aggressive, one partner may be more passive aggressive. So these conflicts are differences in how couples or relationships resolve their conflicts can worsen those conflicts over time and, ultimately lead to unhealthy resolution strategies that show up over time in the relationship. Especially with avoidance, we find folks maybe avoiding communicating or avoiding resolving those conflicts through maybe seeking outside sources of pleasure, right? Through alcohol or drugs or spending money or infidelity. Intimacy and connection. This is something that really changes and evolves in romantic relationships over time. So, when partners are facing emotional or physical distance in their relationship due to, routine or stress or unmet needs, whatever it might be, decline in that affection or shared experiences, spending time together, hobbies, whatever it might be, can result in partners feeling really disconnected or neglected, right? And this, again, is often where other things start to enter the picture to fill some of those unmet needs. Next is managing expectations. So this one's tough, right? Early on in a relationship, we tend to communicate what our expectations for that relationship is. But as romantic relationships move forward in time, we can hold unrealistic or often unspoken expectations that lead to disappointments, right? Because we haven't communicated with each other. So there might be difference in values or goals or priorities that arise later on the relationship and then cause friction. So this is why we always recommend those entering a romantic relationship to have these conversations about expectations and values and goals and whatever it might be early on so they don't continue to arise later on in the relationship. Balancing independence and togetherness is a big one. So it can be really tough for romantic relationship partners to sort of strike that right balance between personal independence, personal endeavors, and then the relationship closeness. It can be really tricky. So some romantic partners might feel suffocated by dependency, and others might feel abandoned by excessive independence, right? And so finding what really is the right balance for each individual in that partnership and then all partners that are involved. If someone really prioritizes their independence, but doesn't take note of maybe their partner really prioritizes the togetherness, communication needs to happen there. You need to find a healthy balance that, ensures that the needs are met of really everyone involved in that dynamic. External stressors, so external meaning these things outside of our control, outside of the relationship itself. A lot of relationship stress actually isn't coming from within the relationship, but external factors. So these can be things like financial difficulties. That's one of the biggest issues faced by romantic relationships. Work-related stress, which is often related. Family conflicts are a big one, and health issues. So all of these sort of external stressors can spill over into the romantic relationships, or amplify existing problems that were already in the relationship, either create new ones, cause tension, or just cause, an exacerbation of existing issues that might have already been there. Cultural and social difference are important to note in romantic relationships that, sometimes partnerships come from different cultural backgrounds or traditions or social norms around, what are the boundaries and expectations in a romantic relationship. So when there are these differences, it can sometimes challenge our understanding or compromise romantic relationships. Some of these expectations are coming from society or stigma. All of these things can add additional layers to a romantic relationship. So one that I hear coming up a lot in romantic relationships specifically is this concept of gender roles, right? So in certain cultures, there's very strict and rigid gender roles, where in other cultures, it's more gray, right? And there's more of an egalitarian system within the partnership. So whatever system works for you and your partnership is great, right? But finding a way to balance everyone's cultural needs and social differences. Change and growth. So really important. I say this in every training that I get is like, we've got to be willing to change and grow in whatever relationship we're in and recognize that people evolve over time. You may have been a really great match for someone in the beginning, and then sometimes mismatched growth. Maybe someone's moving in one direction of their life towards their goals and values, and one is feeling maybe stuck, can cause strain in a relationship. So, a lack of effort to at least try and grow and progress together can lead to feelings of incompatibility. You may have been really compatible with that person when you first entered that romantic relationship, and then due to any number of factors on this slide, may ultimately cause a breakdown in the romantic relationship over time. You may not be a good fit for people in the long term. And that's hard to admit, right? Because we have lots of love and history with the people we enter our relationships with. But sometimes it's nothing specific that causes a breakdown in a relationship. We've just moved in different directions. Last thing I'll mention is neglecting a relationship is really huge, right? And so we do have a tendency to become comfortable or stagnant in especially our romantic relationships because maybe we've been with that person for so long, or we have been so close with them in proximity for so long that we can really feel comfortable and stop doing the things that we might have done in the beginning of that relationship. So what I'll often hear in couples work is, my partner is taking the relationship for granted. They're no longer nurturing it, prioritizing the aspects of the life that, may cause us to feel undervalued in that relationship. So, a lack of an effort to maintain the connection can lead to a decline in relationship satisfaction over time. All right. So ultimately, of any of these common challenges in relationships, it's really important that both partners have a mutual understanding of maybe where the breakdown is occurring. So if one partner thinks that communication in the relationship is really stellar and then the other finds that it's insufficient, it's going to be hard to find a compromise and find a way forward. So it involves got to hear the other sides of the dynamic. You've got to have some mutual understanding, be patient with each other and willing to work together and hear that other side. So with that open communication, some empathy for other people's experience and commitment to growing together, many of these issues can be resolved or mitigated. I do want to acknowledge often when I'm speaking, it might sound like I'm talking about partners as exclusively two partners, but anytime I'm talking about these things, it acknowledges that there could be two or more partners in any kind of relationship dynamic. So you may experience one of these issues in one, partnership or one dynamic with someone, and then it could be really good in someone involved in your partnership. So really want to make sure that those who are in relationships that are not monogamous understand that this applies to all those relationship dynamics as well. Okay, now the reason that everyone is here, right, is, relationships are so important and integral to our lives, and we all want to know, how do we improve our romantic relationships? What are strategies that can help us maybe move through conflict that you're having with a current partner, or ways that we can improve strategies when we enter new relationships, right? So we've all, for the most part, had failed relationships in the past. You're really lucky if you stuck with the very first one. But all of these are strategies that each of us could probably use a little bit more in our lives. Again, either to benefit the romantic relationships we're already in or to make our future romantic relationships more fulfilling and healthy for us. So, some of these strategies, as I mentioned, the most common challenge on the last slide, the most important strategy is prioritizing communication, right? So this can look like active listening, which is this idea of listening without interrupting, holding for a moment, right? We have this temptation to respond or defend when we're having these kind of conversations, but really listening without our interruptions, expressing our needs really clearly. So I'll often recommend statements like I statements. So if I want to communicate a need, instead of saying, you never listen to me, it's I feel unheard when you do this thing, right? So a really different approach to acknowledging I statement, I feel this way, I experience it this way, than sort of the, defensive of you're doing this and this is unhelpful. Also, really important to check in with our partners and regularly have open, honest conversations about how we feel. So for some people that maybe they are more of avoiders or communication hasn't always been at the forefront, romantic partners could set aside time to have these check-ins. So maybe it's once a week, maybe it's once a month, maybe it's quarterly. We actually sit down and check in on what's going on in our relationship. In a couple slides, I'll actually give you some different language that you can use in those check-ins. Next is showing appreciation and gratitude. So again, we tend to do this really well in the beginning of our relationships, as we're complimenting and we're sharing what we like about the person. We tend to get comfortable and stagnant over time and stop doing this. So something simple as, regularly expressing thanks for the big and the small things your partner does. This could be thanks for putting the dishes away, right? Even though that's really small, something that we might want to acknowledge. Thanks for, making time for me. Thanks for hanging out with me, even small things like that. And complimenting and affirming the qualities to reinforce positivity in the relationship. So maybe there was something that you loved about your partner when you first got together. Maybe it's their independence. Maybe it's the way that they show up for you in really important moments. Do you still affirm that and compliment that quality of them? We often assume, well, our partner knows that because we talk about it all the time, but it can be really important to still kind of send those reminders and enhance the positivity we have in our relationships. All right, spending quality time together. Now, the key here is quality time. Spending time together isn't the same thing. So I recently read this research that like sitting on the couch and watching TV together is actually one of the least intimate things that we can possibly do with someone. And I was thinking of my own relationships and I'm like, how much time do I spend just sitting on the couch watching TV, watching a show, thinking we're spending quality time together? But it's not. So this is setting time aside for activities that you both enjoy, limiting the distractions of the phone or the TV, right? That's a distraction. And focus on being really present and trying new experiences together to create shared memories. So this, of course, does not mean if you're a person who sits on the couch and watch shows with your partner that something's wrong, but how do we carve out other moments together, right? Do you cuddle or hold hands when you're watching those shows together? Do you start a dialogue between them? Do you talk about the episodes? Or do you find activities outside of that altogether? Do you go on a walk around the block? Do you do a coffee together? Do you go grocery shopping together, right? Even some of these mundane things can be quality time because we get rid of those distractions like the phone and the television. We do things together and create memories. Practice empathy and patience. This is something that, again, tends to dissipate over time in our romantic relationships. And so, when I'm working with a couple, my first thing I always ask is to, try and see the situation from your partner's perspective. What would that be like for you if you were in that shoes, if that was something happening to you? So try and see that other perspective. Being patient with differences is not assuming that your partner is going to interpret a situation or respond to a situation in exactly the same ways as you are. And then collaboratively working towards a compromise. You don't always have to agree. You don't always have to respond the same way, but at least working together to maybe each of you move a little bit more of a direction in each other's end. So you're not causing maybe this, pain over time with each other. Physical intimacy is a big one we see in romantic relationships over time. It does tend to dissipate over time, but it doesn't have to dissipate. It can just look different, right? So there are ways to keep your spark alive with regular affection that don't inherently always have to mean sex, right? The frequency of sex may look different with a romantic relationship over time. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your relationship. But some level of physical intimacy, touch is really important to sort of keep that relationship alive. So things like hugging when, you leave the room or giving a kiss or cuddling when you're watching shows, even those forms of intimacy, really cause a lot of benefits to our romantic relationships. So important to, discuss and explore your needs and desires openly to maintain a healthy physical connection. And so what we find is when there's a difference in sort of intimacy and preference in a relationship, the number one solution is like, what if you would have told or asked your partner that that was an unmet need or something going on? And we don't communicate that, it sort of reinforces over time and can get hard to get back. So we talked about the conflict resolution on the last slide, and so really the keys for this one is avoid yelling and bringing up past issues unnecessarily. So we find a lot of couples who, increase their voice or will bring up past issues when it's something at hand you want to be talking about, right? So take a break if emotions run high, go in a different room, revisit the issue with a calm mindset, seek solutions together rather than trying to win the argument. This is a tough one, right? When emotions are high, it's tough to be our best selves. But sometimes that means let's take a break, let's take some distance and come back together. We also talked about, growth and goals. And so it's really important to support each other's goals and growth. We get maybe more independent sometimes in relationships over time. We focus on our own things, but we really want to be encouraging our partners in their personal and professional endeavors, celebrating their successes, right? Providing comfort when they're having challenges in the workplace or financially, but in recognition that it's often these external stressors that impact our relationship. How do we show up and be there for our partner when these things are starting to affect our goals and our growth? Lastly is fostering independence. So this is, respecting each other's individuality and hobbies and balancing that togetherness with, alone time to recharge. So it's good and great and healthy to have friendships that you spend independent time with or hobbies that are separate, right? We do find a lot of codependency over time where folks do everything together, and it can be really healthy to have some of these independent relationships and activities as well. Finally, I'd be remiss to not acknowledge that, sometimes seeking professional help is needed. There is no shame in, going to couples therapy and working together, especially if maybe a similar conflict persists and continues to come up in the relationship. You might consider couples therapy to work through some of those deeper issues with a neutral party. All right. And as always, a final slide on romantic relationships in the adult industry. So any kind of relationships in the adult industry can be complex and shaped by really unique experiences and opportunities because of the nature of the work. So some important considerations for romantic relationships for those in the adult industry, boundaries is the biggest one, right? So how do we navigate boundaries, with trust and communication? So healthy relationships in the industry often rely on these really open and honest discussions about boundaries and expectations and the nature of the work. It can really help partners sort of separate the professional activity from the personal intimacy, right? So having those open conversations of just because one thing, is acceptable here doesn't necessarily mean it is here, and having that conversation together, having a little bit of distance and boundary between the two. Trust, equally essential as partners navigate the emotional and physical dimensions of their roles. So, trust and being really transparent about the work so there are no surprises. What does it look like? What can I expect? Can really foster a sense of security, finding out information from you directly rather than other sources. Common challenges for those who work in the adult industry and have romantic relationships are things like, jealousy and insecurity, social stigma or family stigma about the work, and then a work-life balance. So, it can be difficult for one or more partners, if they're all involved in the industry, to sort of separate professional performances from personal emotions, leading to feelings of insecurity and jealousy, right? So having that separation is really important. Especially when it comes to jealousy, right? So really having open conversations about how the work is so different than the personal emotions and intimacy in someone's personal life. Societal judgments, and I've more often heard this coming from family, right? Wanting to share with your family what your partner might do for work. But these societal judgments or misconceptions about the industry can really strain relationships and cause tension in that way, especially when dealing with that family or public opinion about the industry. And then balancing demanding schedules, right? So these schedules can be really flexible and complex and in feast or famine, right? Work may be really busy at times and really slow at others. So balancing these schedules, maintaining privacy, and really creating these opportunities to protect emotional intimacy can be complex and play a role in these romantic relationships. what I think is so important is developing and maintaining a strong support system. And so this is why I hammer away that importance of like having other friendships or even colleagues that you can turn to when you're having challenges. So, when one or more partners are in the industry, developing strong communication skills, a deep understanding of emotional resilience, and then supporting each other through these unique work-related challenges is really important. You've got to be able to support one another in this work and all the challenges that might come through it. So dating someone in the adult industry might require like a higher level of transparency and shared understanding of what the nature of the job, to reduce misunderstandings that might come later. So have that understanding of what each other does for the work, make sure that you have access to support system and maybe others in similar relationships or dynamics. You have people to turn to when things get tough. And of course, I want to highlight that there's many positive aspects of romantic relationships in the adult industry, including often a higher sense of empowerment, autonomy, and openness in our relationships. So, when I work with professionals in the industry, we often do find these, autonomy and empowerment, that they maybe experience through their work and also show up and positively influence their relationships. You may have a higher sense of self-worth or confidence in yourself and sexually or emotionally in relationships. The industry itself often encourages like a really progressive approach to sexuality and relationships, which can lead to, non-traditional but deeply fulfilling relationship dynamics. And lastly, want to note that there are a variety of relationship structures in the adult industry. Certainly, there are a lot of monogamous relationships in the romantic industry. What you do for work does not change that you're in a monogamous relationship if that's what your orientation is. But, these relationships can vary widely. So we find monogamous, open, polyamorous arrangements throughout the adult industry, really tailored to the preferences and comfort level of both partners. What we do know, though, not just in the industry in general, is that these structures often require a significant amount of communication and mutual understanding of what the relationship dynamic really looks like. So, in full, right? So relationships in the adult industry face some of these unique pressures. They also reflect these really universal themes of love and respect and communication that we want in all romantic relationships. So, like any relationship, the success really depends on the commitment and the effort of all individuals involved in the relationship. All right. And as noted, a few questions that I like to provide for folks. This is 25 relationship check-in questions for you and your partner, written by Maya Salas. Time to initiate a relationship check-in. Here is a list of questions for couples. So, if you are a person in a relationship thinking, hey, it might be time to check in with my partner, take a quick picture of this slide, jot some notes down. I'm going to read through them relatively quickly so we can keep moving with today. Relationship check-in. Do you feel like we're spending enough time together? Is there anything that you wish we did more of? What are the things I do that you appreciate and make you feel loved? Is there anything bothering you that we haven't talked about yet? What do you want us to work on together? How do you think our communication has been going lately? What are your goals this month, and how can I help support them? Are there any new experiences you'd like to have together soon? Is there anything you need that I haven't been fulfilling lately? What can I do to make your days better or easier? What am I doing now that you really like or appreciate? What do you see as my biggest growth areas to improve on? Is there anything I've stopped doing that you'd like me to start again? Is there anything stressful for you lately that I should be aware of? Have you generally been happy lately? Is there anything that you'd like to do differently or try in the bedroom? What are you looking forward to this week or month? Is there anything you'd like to discuss about our goals for the future? What are some ways we can have more fun in our relationship? Do you feel close to me lately? Do you feel like anything has been missing from our relationship? How do you think we've been doing with resolving conflicts? How are you feeling about your own self-care habits? Are there any important upcoming dates or times that I should be aware of? Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Now, these questions are meant to be open-ended, so they don't just give like a yes or no answer. Um, to just start the conversation with your partner. And of course, no one is expected to ask all 25 of these questions with your partner unless you tend to have really open communication. But even as I was reading them, I think of like, when is the last time I asked my partner one of these questions? Especially if you've been in a relationship for a period of time. So maybe you just start with one, right? Maybe you start a check-in with just one of these questions, really a gauge kind of where your relationship is at, and then add more questions over time. So again, take a quick picture of that if you want to. This is also found online. Again, the author is Maya Salas, Miasalas, 25 relationship check-in questions for you and your partner. Okay. I apologize. I'm still recovering from a cold if you see me drinking and doing what I need to do. But before we transition into, we'll give us a little break in between this and the panel. What I want to leave everyone with is a meditation for healing relationships. So what I do want to acknowledge is that romantic relationships can be a really soft and often painful spot for a lot of people. As I mentioned earlier, romantic relationships tend to have the most influence on our health outcomes, whether good or bad, even above friends, family, co-working relationships. And what that means is some people have been deeply wounded and experienced a lot of harm from romantic relationships. Some people are currently in romantic relationships where they're actively experiencing harm or challenges. So think of where you are in your own romantic relationship journey. Maybe you're in a really comfortable and healthy relationship right now, and that's different than the ones that you've been in the past. Maybe you're in a relationship that's gotten really kind of stagnant and you're wanting to bring some spark back into that relationship. Maybe you're recently single, right? And looking at what are the kind of relationships I want to have moving forward? What do I deserve in my life? Or maybe you're involved in a relationship where it's really not good for you and not healthy, and you're looking for kind of some answers and a way out. So, to wrap us up, I want to share with you a meditation for healing relationships by Dear Gabby. So, what I will ask everyone is to get comfortable, seated straight in your chair, and place your palms facing upward. And place them like this, and then rest them often right on your thighs. Okay, comfortable, close your eyes. All right. Welcome into your meditation a relationship that you have been struggling with, or a connection that needs healing. Take a deep breath in and feel into all the feelings that come up when you think about this relationship. And on the exhale, let them go. Take another deep breath in and breathe into all the emotions that move through you. And let them go with an exhale. Be patient with your emotions. Allow yourself to be real with what's up. And give yourself permission to fully feel all of the emotions, any discomfort, any suffering, sadness, loss. Breathing into that space in your heart, breathe in. And on the exhale, let it go. Being fully present with all of the emotions, all of the stories, and all of the memories. Giving yourself full permission to breathe in again to that space of awareness within you. And let it go. Breathe in the energy of acceptance, honoring this relationship for all that it needs to be, all that it has taught you, and all that you can still continue to learn. On the exhale, let that go. Keep breathing in deeply and exhaling completely. Continuing to give yourself more and more permission to honor, accept, and even forgive if that feels right for you. Take a deep breath in, and on the exhale, let it go. Forgiving yourself for anything you could have done differently. Becoming willing to forgive the other person if appropriate. And take your deep breath in. Allow that willingness to take over your heart, to fill you with love. And on the exhale, let it go. If you're not able to forgive the other person, focus on forgiving yourself. Breathe into that space in your heart where love dwells, where forgiveness resides. Breathe into that space in your heart where you can trust that everything is happening the way it should be. Trusting that this relationship has offered you everything that you need to grow, to love, to heal. Breathing in, breathing out, honoring all that this is and all that it can be. Being in acceptance of what allows you to step into what can be. Breathe in and breathe out. Giving yourself full permission to honor, acknowledge, and be present with all the emotions that have come through you and any lingering emotions that need to be released. Now hold in your mind's eye an image of this person. Open your heart now to see them through the lens of acceptance, to see them or you through the lens of forgiveness, to see them through the lens of love. All that you need is the slightest willingness, and love will be revealed. Breathe that in. Let that go. Breathe in and release. And when you're ready, open your eyes back to the presentation. Wiggle yourself a little bit. Ground yourself to the present moment. Okay. I hope that was helpful for some and fully acknowledge that it might have been hard for some as well. That might mean some of these strategies on these slides could be helpful for you, especially reaching out to a support system or maybe even a professional to talk more through healing your romantic relationships. To wrap us up, this was Being Your Best Self in Romantic Relationships, and I'm really excited to turn it back to Laura to introduce our wonderful panelists for the next hour of today's summit.